Solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan, and normally we have the camera going, but today we're audio only. My guest might be a little bit late. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm glad you're here and listening. The show today is called Third Culture Stories, the main idea being about someone who grew up with American citizenship in another country, but didn't actually come to America to live and learn American culture until she was, I think, high school, and a lot of interesting stories she has to share. She's, full disclosure, a very good friend. I went to school with her in junior high in Tripoli, Libya, and we did not. She and another Tripoli friend found me like 40 something years later, and after reuniting, it's just amazing to find out what it was like for her to come to the country where she had citizenship and figure out what it meant. A long process. And before I bring her on, hopefully she'll be able to join us soon. I just have to, again, this is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach. I'm a diversity educator. If you want to check out my website, it's knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com. I coach and train individuals and organizations in learning to line up their actions with their values to make life more clear and more what you really want it to be, and to build a plan so that you can actualize what really matters to you. Again, that's knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com. So I'm going to say I'm a little rattled today because I'm so upset about the killing of the woman in Minnesota, and I want to acknowledge the loss. I feel there were many Americans grieving the death of Renee Nicole Good in Minnesota, who was only 37 years old, and it's still a loss and tragic no matter which country she belonged in, but apparently she was a US citizen and shot and killed by an ICE agent. And I also know I'm not alone in being just upset and hard to find all the words about the aggressive use of force that's being sanctioned by our administration to use ICE agents in our own cities against our own people and people anywhere that's unjustified. And it's definitely affecting me, and I know many others. So my condolences, my heart goes out to Renee Nicole Good's family. Apparently she has a young child who I hope will be taken care of well. And I just pray for accountability, a calmer, peaceful approach, just, with a lot of people praying for there to actually be more safety and law and order for everyone by the hands of our own government. So that said, I've got the good news that Vanessa is here. Vanessa Butler. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I am so fascinated by both your professional life and some of the stories we've been able to share in the year or so that um, we reunited after, let's just say 40 plus years.
Since junior
But
high. Yeah.
yeah, and I just thought you were an amazing publicist, but I would love it if you would tell people more about your professional background before we start talking about
I
something.
I um I grew up in Libya in North Africa, and I went to school. That's where I met Bahia. And at high school, we left, or I left. My family stayed in Libya. They didn't have when I left. It was under the reign of Gaddafi, and there was no high schools for girls. So pretty much every expat went away to boarding school, and I attended boarding school at Kent, Connecticut. And I would fly back to Libya. And then later, I went to USC. I got a degree in aerospace engineering, and I did a work study program at USC and worked for the classical radio station, KUSC. And as a result, in 1984, I was hired by the Phil to do a summer internship for the Olympic Arts Festival, because the Olympics were there, and we hosted an arts festival at the Music Center and the Hollywood Bowl. So I stayed there for about 25 years. I went to my engineering job, and then I left after 6 months to come back and train with the Philharmonic. And then I stayed, and then later I opened my own company in the performing arts. I worked at theaters like the Geffen Playhouse and the Broad Stage, and I started my own telemarketing company for the arts. So I did have a degree in engineering, but I really ended up in the performing arts, doing a lot of things that actually required a lot of my engineering background.
Hmm.
We were just getting into marketing in those days, um, nonprofits, I mean. And there was a lot of computer technology, which I understood. And I later became a marketing director. And having lists and managing databases was a big part of the job, and I already knew how to do it. So you never know what you major in and what you end up doing.
That
But
that is so fat. I love that. Like from rocket scientist to the LA Philharmonica Orchestra publicist
I know I
to
used to say it's not rocket science, but I actually, whatever difficulty would come up during my time there was like 25 years, but none of it was as difficult as rocket science. But it was fun.
wow.
I was there for the years of Giulini, and then I ended my time when um, Dudamel came. I went to work for another classical station after I left the Phil. It was called K Mozart at the time in Los Angeles, and now it's a country station. But I worked for a man who was the sole proprietor. His name was Saul Levine, and the Levine family still owns. Still one of the only sole proprietor families in Los Angeles that owns an FM signal, if you can believe it.
Hmm.
It's rare these days.
Hmm.
But I hooked up with Bahia later, just kind of happenstance. She was on Facebook, and I was with my friend Monique, which I also grew up with in Libya, and we were just talking about people we really liked but wondered where they were. And Bahia's name came up, and so we tried to find her, and there she was. She wasn't just on Facebook; she was in Davis, and we were in Sacramento. So that's a small world.
Yeah, who would have thought? Like,
No,
what are we
yeah,
essentially 20, 25 minutes apart
yeah,
right
yeah,
now?
yeah,
Um, who would there was no way we would have even imagined. We didn't even know if we'd ever see each other again after
yeah. The
graduating from
way,
ninth grade.
yeah, the way that worked is when you left, you kind of left.
Hmm.
I mean, in my time there, I was one of the few families that stayed, but many families came and left, many ethnicities. Gaddafi had all kinds of countries really hired out to work in Libya. So there was a couple years where the Sudanese engineers were there, and they were laying irrigation in the alfalfa fields. The Bulgarians came and the Swedes came, but there were always in the oil world, which is where my father worked. There was always a British oil company, an Australian oil company, a lot of American oil companies. Not Italian, and if there were, Gaddafi kicked them out. We were there for the revolution. Our apartment, we were supposed to be evacuated like everyone else in 1968, I think, but they forgot our apartment, so we got
Yeah,
to see the.
tell them what that was
Yeah,
like when
I'm
they
waiting out.
forgot.
Yeah, my apartment building was downtown near the palace, and the king was, his name was King Idris, and it was a bloodless coup. Nobody died. They did give a bunch of handguns to a bunch of crazy teenagers, so they were shooting them all over the place, but it wasn't a true military coup. It was an organized takeover. But along with that is Gaddafi evacuated all of the Italians, and we saw them line up, and all they could have was a suitcase. And they were lining up for buses, and they were being taken to the airport. I did later talk to some friends who remember when all the Italians came back from the Middle East. Italy didn't know what to do with them. There were so many. They had been there since Mussolini days. So they go back generations and generations of Italians, but Gaddafi kicked them all out. At the
As
same
they
time, he
call.
kicked the Egyptians out because he was having a problem with whoever was ruling Egypt. But then he had to bring them back because, from better or worse, the Egyptians were the doctors and the teachers. So he kicked all the doctors out and found out that wasn't a good idea.
And then asked some of them to come back.
Well, yeah, he invited the doctors and the teachers to come back. It was a great place to live, but later after he took over, it became more uh, fascist. It wasn't quite that way before. I know that I think that King Idris lived out his time in Egypt after the coup. And I also know that Italy had to make reparations to Libya for occupying it for so long when they shouldn't have been.
Hmm.
So, and then Gaddafi, few years, he was all of 28 years old when he took over. But a few years into it, he nationalized the oil companies. But they were still making so much money, they stayed. And then he gave a stipend, more or less, kind of like welfare. But he gave an oil stipend to all the natural born Libyan citizens, like a return on the money. So I think that's why other cultures work there. Because if you're getting money for free, it's not, the Arabs had shops and stuff, but they didn't have jobs. Like they didn't work in the oil fields and they didn't, they weren't engineers, but they were tradesmen and salespeople, like in their own, in the souk and everything.
Yeah.
And they own
That makes sense.
restaurants. Yeah.
And a family of friends that we got close to, they pretty much all of them were doctors. The father, the mother,
Oh, yeah.
and the kids. Yeah,
Yeah.
very dear friends of ours who
Right.
came from Libya to study in America and then went back to Libya.
Yeah, they certainly need doctors and nurses and all that. I mean, Libya was very beautiful before the revolution. It was like gosh, it reminded me of the French Riviera, but it's just the Libyan Riviera. All the cruise ships used to come in, and used to be quite a beautiful party town. And then when Gaddafi took over, it just slowly changed. Everybody became more fascist, more extreme. Um, he wasn't. He kicked all the media out. He kicked the American Air Force Base out. That had been there a long time. It was called Wheelus.
Yeah.
And that went our TV and our school and everything. So we had to build a school called the American Oil Company School. And that's where I met Bahia.
And it was international. There were people from
Hmm.
a lot
All
of
of us.
different countries.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were there, like Vanessa said, only 2 years. And my father was um, a doctor, a research doctor, and he was helping update medical research
Yeah.
there. And Monique's father was an engineer, right?
Yeah.
Geologist,
A
engineer.
geologist. Yeah.
And I remember that because my father also spoke Arabic, different Arabic. Still, he could understand.
Yeah.
Um, and communicate very well. In Libya, he was also very gregarious man. He would talk to people that we met anywhere, and we watched Gaddafi have apartment buildings set up, and literally provide homes for people who were living on the
In tin
street or
shacks, yeah.
and I remember a very initial impression was like, wow, he's really giving people homes. And we would talk to him after we saw their transition, and we lived in the apartment building with some of them, and some of the in the apartment building, and they were very happy because they had running water, and a lot of them enjoyed that stage.
Right. But
And things changed.
epidemics of cholera broke out and they went back to being Bedouin.
Hmm.
They're tribal. The people are tribal, and they live, a lot of the families live in the desert.
Hmm. Hmm.
They have tents and they have very large families. And then for the most part the Italians lost all their homes, so the Libyans did move into a lot of those villas.
Yeah.
They weren't apartment buildings, but they were full-on villas.
And
Um,
so after the revolution, like it's interesting because like for some reason your father's company hadn't been notified, but there wasn't a way for him to communicate because he was out in the field, so to speak, right? And there was no way to communicate back to your family that there was
yeah,
a
we didn't.
revolution.
Yeah, we didn't have telephones. It was back in the time when you had to go to the post office and then place a call, and then wait a few hours, and then go back to the post office to take the call.
And so I remember you talking about I think you were outside and your mom was in the apartment, and then
Oh yeah, we were crawling on our bellies because the Libyan teenagers, I don't know, they were having a good time, I guess, shooting, celebrating. But my mom popped up to make us lunch, and she had curlers in her hair, and a guy shot at her, a kid, and it went through the kitchen window, and she fell. She had to fall back down, and he wasn't trying to kill her. I think she just surprised him. So the truth was, when my dad came in from the desert, he thought we'd been evacuated. I was never so sure. I almost thought we were going to move then back to America, but we didn't. And we stayed until, well, I graduated boarding school in 1980. So we were there from 68 to like 1981. And then my family moved to Peru after that. So I never say I lived in Peru because I was already in college by then.
Mm-hmm.
So I only ever really lived in Libya.
And you had to learn Arabic, right? You learned Arabic when
We
you were
did. We went
as
to
a
school
child.
for it. Yes.
Mhm.
I mean, later they did try to teach Arabic in the American school, but that was a joke. But when the revolution happened and the school was at Wheelus Air Force Base and it got shut down, I went to an Arab school for a while, about 6 months, and then my mom transferred me to a French school. The lycées, the French lycées are all over the world, so that was pretty consistent. And then by that time they had opened up this new American oil company school, and by that time they had lifted the curfew that had been over Libya, and so everybody had flown back after 6 months, and all the people that I knew had come back, and we all regrouped in second grade at the new school.
Hmm.
um, we took some tests to figure out if we qualified to be in second grade, but I guess we did. And that's where I knew everyone, Sean and Monique, and all the friends I made. Mostly we stayed in one place because my dad was head of production for Occidental.
Hmm.
And production people stay. They're the ones that produce the oil. But
And I guess
he worked and lived in the desert a lot. And we lived in town.
hmm. So yeah, there was a lot of times he was out in the field.
I know
Go ahead.
I I'm only struck recently because when Donald Trump says he's going to take over Venezuela, I can almost hear Gaddafi, who's always thinking he was going to take over America, or
Hmm.
Saddam Hussein, who was going to take over America. all these kind of
Interesting.
tyrant type people, yeah. And they all get
Hmm.
caught in the end. Oh, I know that Gaddafi housed Idi Amin. Libya, he fled. No other country would take Idi Amin, but Gaddafi took him. And I
Mm.
remember being in boarding school when Gaddafi wanted to beef up his military, so he invited Castro into Libya with the military to train his soldiers, and almost lost Libya to Castro. There was a coup, but Castro lost. But boy, that was really it's like get the chicken into the hen house, letting Castro in. But Gaddafi stopped that.
Oh my gosh, I almost forgot about that.
Yeah, he was there to train because, of course, he was going to take over America. And anyway, it was just empty rhetoric. Um,
Delusional.
but Castro wanted the oil. There's a lot of oil in Libya, and that would have been
Yeah.
a interesting coup. Yeah, I know.
Well, and we can always do snapshots more of Libya, but I would love to hear move forward to like what it was like when you initially. I remember you saying your mother said because you possibly like some of the people like after ninth grade had to come back to America, and we moved to the state my mother was born in, which was Alabama, and that's where I went to high school. But a lot of y'all who were raised in Libya had different high school options, but your mom really insisted that you go to high school in America so that you could get a sense of what it was to be American. And is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. Become more. She thought I wasn't Americanized, especially if I wanted to attend university in America. I didn't quite understand it. So I was one of the few people from Libya that went to the States for boarding school. Everyone else went to, there's a lot of Marymounts around, Marymount London, Marymount Rome. A lot of people went to the Marymounts, or they went to Switzerland to a school called Lausanne. And because it's only a 45-minute plane ride back home. Me, it was a 2-day trip to get from America at the time, to get from America
Hmm.
to Libya. And she turned out to be right. I didn't really understand anything about American culture. I Part of it is it's tied up in pop culture movies and television shows and stuff, which I had not seen. I still have a kind of blank part of my history, which happened in America, or it didn't happen here, but it happened, but there was, publicized and stuff, of which we could very, very vaguely sometimes get the BBC, but it wasn't until the end that Gaddafi got up a television station and we would watch Egyptian comedies. Woody Woodpecker in Arabic was funny. And they got a hold of Lucille Ball, and in Arabic, I'll never forget the candy scene.
With a
It's
conveyor belt.
Yes, and it's funny. It's funny whether you were understood Arabic or English, because she was such a slapstick comedy person that you could understand what was funny about it. But
Yes.
I was told, some friends in boarding school told me that people thought I was a little bit slow, so I thought that was good because then I would have nothing but up. So I stayed 4 years there at Kent, Connecticut, and then I transferred. I got tired of the snow, and I moved to back. I moved to LA. I'd never been in LA before, but I went to USC, and the weather was nicer. And then
Hmm.
I just stayed in LA, but LA suited me. It's very ethnic. Many cultures, many kinds of different cultures live in LA. So I felt more at home than I felt, in boarding school.
That makes
Um,
sense.
it was an Episcopalian boarding school. It
In
was,
New England.
yeah, it was beautiful. It was
Hmm.
the prettiest high school I'd ever seen. But it gave me a good education, and I started to understand things better. So it was good. So I kind of knew what I was getting into if I was going to stay in America. Um, it took me a
Yeah.
long time, though, to acclimate to, I don't know, American sense of humor, uh,
Mm.
things that they like, that they were born into,
Hmm.
socialized into, which I wasn't. Um, it's probably why I did really well in classical music, because Well, that's more of a European thing than I find
Hmm.
it to be American thing. Um, and I fit in there because everybody is, every artist is from some country. Very few American superstar or classical music people. Um, and then my father, I come from a hillbilly family, if you want to know the truth. My dad was 20 years older than my mom, and was, his family rode Route 66 to pick fruit in government camps before I was born, obviously. And back early on after the war and the Depression, American oil companies had started drilling overseas. So they raided these government camps set up by FDR for work camps, and they wanted young, strong men. And that's how my father got into the oil business. He was a mud engineer, which is pretty low down on the totem pole. But he immediately spent most of his life in Venezuela. And yeah, he rarely worked in America. He came home and got married once before my mom, and he came home and then married my mom years later. And then he just didn't want to go overseas alone, so we all went after a stint in Alaska. I did my kindergarten years in Alaska.
Hmm.
We were up at the North Shore pipeline, the drilling rig up there. We were right on the border of Russia. We could see the American Air Force Base. They always would raise the flag in the
Hmm.
morning, and then past that was the Russian. Was the beginning of some part of Russia, so it was very cold.
Hmm.
But I do remember seeing the Aurora Borealis and putting
Yeah.
tinfoil on our windows in the day in the summer because the light was 24 hours. And then at night in the winter, the darkness was 24 hours. But my
That
whole
would.
family, they're all hillbilly. Mostly they've resided in Oklahoma and Texas between Fort Worth and, and, uh, and Medill, Oklahoma.
Hmm.
My dad was one of 14 kids. I
Wow.
think he was the youngest, but then there was one other younger, but he died in the Feather River with his dad fishing up when they were picking fruit in Yuba City, California. It's very
Wow.
funny, but I was born in Colusa, California, which is not that far from here. My dad would laugh considering where he took me all over the world. He would laugh to know that I ended up right near Colusa, California, which
Yeah.
is, I know when I think about it.
That is wild. Wow. So he was the youngest of 14. That is
Yeah.
that's just like really interesting uh history you just gave us a snapshot of. And it was the work camps that so
Hmm.
he with a lot of the family, they were
Uh-huh.
agricultural workers
Oh yeah, they pick
and
fruit.
they had to
They
pick fruit.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was a lot of fruit trees in California,
Oh yeah.
and they come up and you know
And it
the dep-
and they
the de-
go ahead.
the depression was a very bad thing, but my father came in at the end. So they have pictures and stories. The whole family, to them, it was like a summer party on Route 66. They had a good time. They went eating from fire pit to fire pit. And then when the fall time was upon them and summer was over, they would come back down to Oklahoma. But the year that my grandfather died in the Feather River, my grandmother stayed in Yuba City, California.
Mhm.
So whenever we would visit America, which wasn't that often, we would come to Yuba City, California to see my grandmother.
That makes sense.
Um, and
So there's um so that's so interesting. So he got involved with the oil companies because they took over the work camps that
well, they
were.
hired guys that were about to be out of work, and they needed young, expendable but strong guys, boys, and they trained them, and that's how he came to be in the oil business.
So interesting.
Prior to that, he was voted most likely to be a used car salesman. I know
Which
that
he did.
in Libya, I think the depression had a funny effect on people who survived it. And one of the effects that it had on my father was he didn't trust credit, didn't trust banks. He always needed to have other businesses going on. Just working for one thing was never gonna, in case something happened, he needed to have an out all the time. So what he used to do was the Arabs would buy these very expensive, after they kicked all the Italians out, all the mechanics left, everything you think of that runs a city was gone. And there was nobody there to fix these very expensive cars. And there were Bentleys and Jaguars, and usually they didn't have much wrong with them, nor did they have many miles on them. What it was is the carburetors, back then they had carburetors, and they would fill up with the fine sand, from the Sahara, and
Oh
when we'd
yeah.
have sandstorms. So
Hmm.
my dad would go and find the owner, buy the car, fix it up because he knew how to, and I would be his assistant. And then him and my mother would drive the car to the dock and ship it over to London and sell it. So he had that going on in addition to running production. And then, well, like most hillbillies and many people in Libya, it was when Gaddafi took over, it became a dry country.
That's right.
Muslims don't, alcohol is not part of their thing. So my dad put together, he built it, in parts, but it was two, one still was 100 gallons and another still was 70 gallons. And he and my mother for almost 5 or 6 years ran a moonshine business out of our garage. And we were the kids in the neighborhood. We helped her bottle the white lightning. We used to buy this gas water called Bingashir. Now you guys have Perrier or whatever. We buy the water, you know, drop, empty it, and then fill it with white lightning. And my mother would cut it with water. And we had one of the largest retail. You know, we made a lot of money selling moonshine because it was good because we never touched it until my father came in from the desert. So we cooked it longer than most people. Other people made their own white lightning, but they would be a bit impatient and the purity of it wasn't as good as ours because it is, rot gut and you have to be careful when it can ruin your brain. But yeah, so
Hmm. Well,
and she employed the kids in the neighborhood and we all kept quiet about it. Nobody had phones and of course my father had to bribe all the right people, but I mean, we weren't the only ones doing it, but we were the only ones that really had an avid business of people. They would come to the gate, leave an order on a stool uh, in a paper bag, and then my mother would come out. She never saw the people. I mean, she did, but only when she handed them. She never sold to Arabs, but it was just kind of a very quiet transaction. And we had nine
to
German shepherds that kept everybody at bay.
to cover up, like that was enormously risk taking. But I mean,
Oh
did
yeah,
did you have any idea, or did they say, "Don't
yeah.
you
No,
ever say a word"?
and my parent, yeah, they said it's 50 lashes with the whip, so you can't talk. So I didn't. It's only today as an adult where everyone I've known most of my life, they go, so that my parents were buying moonshine from your parents because I never spoke about it ever.
No,
Ever.
I
Nothing.
had no idea until we re-met again, like
Yeah. Yeah.
decades later. I had no idea.
Because not a lot of families sold it. They made it for themselves, but they didn't sell it. We
And
sold
it
it.
and it helped explain. I was like, I I loved you so much, and I still do, and we laughed so hard together. And when we were reconnecting, I realized, and you were talking about this, I realized, oh my God, maybe that's why we could never go to Vanessa's house.
Maybe. Although my mom was notoriously known as evil woman, so nobody wanted to visit her. Uh, but no, he, I mean, that's how literally the depression affected him. He was never going to get caught. Later, the world changed and you couldn't even buy a car without a credit card. He finally acquiesced and had a credit card, but he always paid it off. And he said, if you can't buy it in cash, then you don't need it. And the depression affected him for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
And he couldn't shake it.
yeah, my
Um,
mother too. It affected my mother too in a different. My father didn't grow up in the American Depression, but my mother did.
yeah.
My father grew up in Lebanon.
Which has its own form of depression. I'm sorry, I used to go to Lebanon every New Year's Eve, Beirut, and we would stay in the Phoenicia Hotel, and they had a very large floor show. It was very bigger than anything I've ever seen in Vegas. And then the war happened in the 70s, and like blew it all up, and I'm sorry you never got to see it
Me too.
because it was pretty fantastical. And everyone would buy their gold in Beirut. They would go there because they had jewelry stores. They were a little bit more. Beirut was more European than Libya. Um,
Mhm.
Libya is more conservative, but
Yeah, yeah, at least three different religions in Lebanon. I've heard many people say it was the Paris of the Middle East.
yeah, I mean that's what people went there to party, and they went there to have a good time, and it was beautiful, and the stores were glittering with pastries and jewelry, and yeah, no, it was thriving. And I'm sorry they blew up the city because that city was so expensive to build. I doubt they could afford to build it again. I mean, the Phoenicia Hotel was made of marble. They
Hmm.
had the most amazing swimming pool. It was a concave glass that the so downstairs in the bar behind the bartender was one of the edges of the swimming pool. And it was in concave glass, and people that were upstairs swimming didn't know that there were a bunch of men and people down in the bar watching the girls dive in, and the water pressure would push their bathing suits down. So you could
Disgusting.
see everything. And then they didn't
Horrible.
even know it. Because, yeah, I know. But who would build a hotel like that again? So, yeah, we did that a lot. And then we traveled all over. I think my family was very, my parents anyway, were very adventurous. So, you can't do things anymore the way you could, but we went to Egypt, we climbed the pyramids. You can't do that anymore.
Mm.
I've been to Egypt many times, but they closed the pyramids down. I think it was just ruining the pyramids to have people in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Amsterdam, Italy a lot. One of our favorite places is at least once a month we went to Malta because everybody went to Malta. It was
Mm.
just a 45-minute plane ride or a nighttime on a cruise ship. And you got out of Libya. You could just sit out on the beach, not be harassed or anything.
Mm.
And then we went to Switzerland, and pretty much we spent a month one summer in Barcelona. Our cousins who also worked with us in the Middle East, they met us there. We all got an apartment. We saw our first bullfight. That was kind of horrible. Barcelona was very pretty. Peru was very pretty. My parents stayed there for 7 years, except that Peru was very rich and very poor. They had the extremes. The poor people lived in mountains that surround the city, and at night you could see the lights. They were just dirt. It was just dirt mountains, and they had dug holes, and you could see the lights where all the people were living. It's crazy. And then the rich people, they were covered in security guards and bulletproof glass and stuff like that. So it was not a very safe place.
Mm.
And we lived, of course, in the suburb, like we lived in Libya. And we were not in a compound. I know that the people in Saudi, I met many of them at boarding school. They lived in compounds, so they never really knew any Arab families where we lived among them. And, I got to know many Arab families and was friends. Of
Yeah.
course, they are different. They have different goals in life, They got married very young, not something we were going to do. But, they wanted to know why. I'll never forget a conversation with a friend of mine named Suad. She wants to know why it's so important that American women get this education and then have a job, like work for somebody. And I said, well, hopefully it's more than a job, and it's something that fulfills them. And she goes, so having children doesn't do that? I said, no, no, it does. They do both. I mean, so she always thought that working was something like something you should avoid if you can. Like if you don't have enough money, then I guess you have to work. But if you're rich, why would you work? Does that was a very simplistic way, but she said, I mean, she said, I don't see my grandmother working as a waitress. I said, you're right. I can see why you would. And I know many grandmothers in America that work as waitresses and truck stops. And I think if you ask them, would you rather work as a waitress, or can I give you a bunch of money and you don't have to work anymore? They would choose the latter. They would, but not all jobs are waitresses and truck stops. There are doctors and lawyers, and there's these careers. And um, I will say that Americans rarely anymore have as many children as they used to have, or as many as you're going to have, because they can't do it all. They can't have 14 children and have a job and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they were happy. I mean, they weren't unhappy.
Yeah, and,
They,
and some of
they
it,
didn't
like
feel-
some of our goals, of course, were universal desires, and some were cultural differences, and some were religious, based on our religion, right? The
yeah,
difference.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I know we had really good friends, and you had really good friends.
No, they're very nice people. They're not at all what people think they are. So I always
Very
found that
generous,
odd. Yeah,
very generous,
I
very
know.
kind.
And they're Muslim, but they're, you know, in a lot of ways, the Muslim religion is very uh, caring of families and wives, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not what people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's oppressive, and it's not. It doesn't have to be.
That's right.
I mean, oppressive towards women. But in fact, is the women don't want to walk outside and show their hair because they don't want to be harassed or attacked, or they don't show their hair, or they cover their body for safety reasons, really, so they're not hassled. But in their home, they're the queen. They have their own rooms, their own, yeah,
Yeah, a lot of very, very strong female figures.
yeah, very exactly.
I never read it. I know I know Gaddafi's mother wrote the book. What was it called? My President, My Son.
Yeah,
I never
yeah.
actually read it.
I didn't either.
I'll have to check it out sometime.
You know what's funny about Gaddafi? He only had female bodyguards.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. I mean, Libya had a mandatory, that's why one of my friends were Libyan, Layla and Ida, and Layla had come of age and they had to up and leave Libya because of forced military service for women, like Israel has the same thing. I think it's 2 years. You have to give your country 2 years.
Hmm.
But she didn't want to do it. So she up and went to Rome. I went to school at Marymount, Rome. Her dad owned the Fiat Corporation in Libya. But Gaddafi just got a little bit crazy near the end. So things became, well, more dangerous. I mean, we eventually left. We left when we left President Reagan bombed Libya, and before he bombed it, he ordered the Americans, the families, not the oil companies. He didn't tell them they had to leave, but any family living there had to move. So the oil companies kept going, but there were no more families, quote unquote, about American oil companies working there. I mean, living there anymore. Then my dad transferred to Peru. So I don't know who went on to run the Occidental fields, but things just got the way people then knew them, and Gaddafi hiding under Leptis Magna or Sabratha, one of those ruins, because he knew that no one was going to bomb the ruins because they were a world sacred, They were very good. I saw my first play in the Roman ruins.
They were stunning. That was just
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah. And the beaches
To
were beautiful. Yeah. There's a lot about Libya to love. We spent a lot of time in Tunis. We would drive from Libya to Tunis. That was crazy. No
In Tunisia,
bathrooms.
Tunisia,
Yeah.
Algeria.
No, no bathrooms. Um, Lots of shahi on the beach. The guys would make tea. They had terrible teeth because they had too much sugar in their tea, but it was good tea. And
Yeah.
everybody used to wonder, you know, like somehow they thought that it was weird for me to be there, but the truth was, I was more used to being there than I was to be. I felt more weird to be in America.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you just a couple more questions. I see we like I can't believe it, but I think we have like 6 minutes left. But um, this is kind of a abrupt transition, but I wanted to say ask you to say a little bit more, like when you said when you were going to boarding school in America, people thought you were slow, and I've seen that before, where if you haven't tuned into the pop culture stuff, you
Hmm.
you just haven't been exposed to it. You just don't know it. So
You don't
to
have
American,
anything to say. Yeah.
yeah, so to Americans who grew up in it and are steeped in it and have no idea what it's like to be outside of America or American pop culture, wherever, um, they can judge you and think that you're slow. It just you just have very different reference points, which may be much more broader and deeper than they've been exposed to.
Well, the truth is, the media now, due to phones and cell phones, you could pick it up much easier than I could back then.
Yeah.
We didn't have when the Wheelus Air Force Base that went the tunnel, everything. I mean, the antenna and everything that boosted it. So it wasn't until cell phones and social media. I mean, can you imagine? I remember looking at Tiananmen Square, and we all had cell phones back then. That was pretty amazing in China when they were rioting in Tiananmen Square. So,
I
things, the world changed for sure.
yeah. Well, will you tell, speaking of not being familiar with American pop culture, there's a story I want to know if you can tell now about one incident where you had to go show up even though you were done with your duties at the Philharmonica or Philharmonic, and you should have been able to go home. They called you back in, and you had to deal with a celebrity that was coming that you had
Oh
no
yeah,
idea who it was. Can you tell that
right. So
story?
I can, I think, yeah. The Hollywood Bowl had we called them least events. Now people know them as rock shows, and we finally hired a company, Bill Silva and Andy Hewitt, and they run them now out of Universal Music, I think. But back then, we didn't do very many. So I was the head of operations for PR, and I used to have to come and get the TV crews set up and get them hooked into electricity and get the angles correct and whatever, just physically. And when I was done, before the concert started, I would usually leave because every artist that came had they had a publicist, and I was the publicist. So I was saying goodbye to the publicist for this concert called Sting. And he said, "Do you want to meet Sting?" And I thought he meant, "Do I want to meet the band or the whole group?" And I said, "No, I'm fine. I don't even know who Sting is. So no, it's okay." And I was getting ready to leave, and on the backstage, I saw this person, and I go back to the publicist. I said, "Oh my God, do you know who that is?" And before he could answer, well, he said yes. And then I said, "He was the actor in this sci-fi movie I love called Dune." Now, that was Dune before Dune of today. It was the Dune that everybody, David Lynch directed that film. And I wasn't very good at actors, I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know their names or nothing. And I obviously didn't even know who was in Dune. But I liked it, and I liked his character. And he was walking over to his publicist. So I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm the publicist here for the Philharmonic. And I just want to say I really loved you in that movie Dune, but I haven't seen you do any other sci-fi since that." And I don't know your name because I'm not good at names, but just saying is I thought it was really great. And he was very little, very short, small. He's very slight, actually. And he reached up and kissed me in the French way, on both cheeks, and turned around laughing and went back to his back to the backstage. And I go, "Okay, so I must have done something like by what was his name that I should have remembered." He goes, "That's Sting." I said, "That's funny. That's the same name of the group tonight." He goes, "No, no, 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 no. It's not a group. It's just one person, and his name is Sting, and that's the singer that's the star of tonight." I go, "Oh my God."
I love that story.
I'm
Oh
like,
my,
okay, I'm just gonna let that go and hope never see anybody again. But again, that goes back to missing a whole, what,
hmm
30 years of
hmm
American. I didn't even know the Vietnam War was going on in the
Oh my
60s.
word.
Never knew it.
Wow.
Only
Okay.
later
Well,
through movies and stuff did I know that we had a Vietnam War.
wow. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I have to have you back because there was much to say about that and more. But we're actually like a minute left. Do you want to say a closing thought, and then I will say my thank yous?
No, I just want to say thank you, Bahia. Thanks for doing this podcast so people can learn about. I love that you open up the channels for people to talk, and when they talk, or through communication at least, you manage to keep everything open and a dialogue open, and so thank you for doing that for the world. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. That's such a nice compliment. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I'm so glad
Okay.
you're back in my life. Thanks for being my guest tonight. And
Okay.
that was fun. I
All
also
right.
want to thank, okay, I'm going to just thank our listeners and viewers and our engineer Rebel and our producer Dean K. Piper and Vanessa again one more time. And please tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4TV or W4CY.com for It's Your Voice. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week. Take care.